It gives me great pleasure to welcome, Honey, how do I pronounce your surname? Häusler. Where's that from? Häusler. Germany. Right.
5-6 generations ago.
Honey is a developmental and behavioural paediatrician. She has dual qualification in sleep medicine, trained at UQ and the Mater Children's Hospital before spending time in Melbourne at the Murdoch Institute. She has a doctorate in behavioural and attentional consequences of adenoid tonsillectomy that she completed at the University of Nottingham, where she was a lecturer. She has a significant role in teaching and assessment in paediatrics and child health, and has a strong interest in medical education. Her work involves children with a variety of developmental and behavioural problems, as well as a number of clinics that specialise in sleep disorders for this population. And she runs generalised clinics for some genetic disorders. And she's going to talk to you about the Prader-Willi Syndrome Centre of Expertise.
Just going to give you a brief update as to where we're at with the Centre of Expertise, that we're trying to sort of pull things together a little bit. Sorry, I'm not sure. Yeah. So I'd just like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Sydney area and acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and pay respects to any Aboriginal people in the room. So I have a number of conflicts of interest because I also run a clinical trials centre for rare neurodevelopmental disorders, and you can see there's a vast number of different genetic syndromes that we're working with there, and I hope next time to come to have 2 or 3 under the Prader-Willi umbrella, because to me that's been one of the biggest changes in the last few years. There are now a number of emerging clinical trials that we'll be able to bring to Australia, and we're currently in negotiation around that. So, on to a bit of the quick background. So, there are varying sort of systems around how we support people with Prader-Willi in Australia. We've had an integrated multidisciplinary clinic in Brisbane for quite a long time, really. But you know, we still have gaps. We don't have psychology, we don't have intellectual disability, mental health. There's an adult team, largely run by endocrinology, but heavy involvement from sleep, general paediatrics and developmental paediatrics. We know very clearly that families often feel really lost when a diagnosis is made, and seeking help can be a real battle when you've got people functioning in silos. So when Kathleen came to me and said, what can we do about this? Because it's really messy. So we sat together and tried to work out how we could progressively move forward on this, because number one, there's not a lot of money to absolutely revolutionise the healthcare system in a week or two. We have to think very progressively about how we can move with this. So there are a number of rare care models around, and it varies between what we would call common rare disorders and ultra rare disorders, where you might have 1 or 2. There's a model in WA which is very much about ultra rare. There's various genetic education programs around, run largely out of the teams here in Sydney with echo models, training primary care. But often it's the simplest thing. Who do I talk to? How do I find somebody that knows something about this disorder? Or how can I help my medical staff or my medical team find out something about this disorder? So to me that speaks very much about coordination of care, having a phone a friend if you like, access to expertise, and actually access to research and science that's happening integrated into the clinic. So we know from some work that Jessica Duas did in the US that coordination and establishment of sort of nurse navigators, care coordination, reduced hospitalisations, reduced emergency visits and missed medical appointments, supported caregiver stress levels, days missed from work, a whole bunch of things, okay? Now, when we're trying to change healthcare systems, the only thing that speaks to the people that hold the dollars in government is money. So we need to demonstrate the impact on the health system of these things. So we thought, informed by some of the work and the information that had already come from you guys about what you thought was really important. Sorry, next one even. What we thought would probably really be a good place to start was to create a network of clinicians around the country that could actually build their own expertise by collaborating and talking about complex cases, but also start to do some standard setting around, okay, so making sure that the child in outback Western Australia had the same access to treatment as the person in the centre of Melbourne, etc. So having some standard setting clinically. We thought virtual needed to be part of what we do, and that's because we're a big country. Networked, because there's lots of people around that have expertise in this, and how do we each learn from each other? We thought it needed to be lifespan, but what you guys told us was that that first initial most traumatic time was very much as you got the diagnosis. So what we have proposed is very much focusing on the early years first, but absolutely moving into transition, because that is the next point. It's those transition points, no matter what developmental disability you have, is diagnosis, moving into school, moving into high school, and then out to adulthood. So there's points of tension all the way along there. So we're really trying to bring people together. We've got a number of things we're working with the Prader-Willi Research Foundation in terms of digital assistance, and that's actually democratising information, really, so that people have access to information. And then there's access through nurse navigation. And I'm really pleased to say that we've now, after much negotiation with the legal people in the public health systems who have a lot of stuff around privacy and IP, we are pretty well there to be able to advertise these two positions. So we are almost good to go, and we'll advertise as soon as that is, let you guys know when it's available. So that's 1 day a week in Sydney, 1 day a week in Brisbane. In Brisbane, we're hoping to combine it with a couple of other specialist nurse navigators for another genetic syndrome. So we should have better coverage across the week. It's just really to say that it aligns with the UN and rare disease priorities, the National Action Plan for Rare Diseases through Rare Voices in Australia, and the Prader-Willi Research Foundation of Australia. So the general principles is it needs to work within the health system, and our health system in Australia is really complicated. It's got private, it's got public, it's got coordinated teams, people work in silos. It's really messy at times. But what we can do with this system, I think, is create a model of change and act as a bit of an example for other disorders that have a similar profile. We need to be able to advocate for care models, I strongly believe, in a lifespan sense, and with chronic specialist care needs. Okay, this is really tricky. Our health systems in Australia are built on the rapid throughput of acute problems. They're not built on caring for chronic needs. So it is really challenging to think about how that might look. And we in developmental services have been struggling forever because it's not seen as a chronic disorder. You can't put as many people through in an hour as you do in an ENT clinic. It just doesn't work the same. And the whole premise in the way our public health system is funded is around rapid throughput. How many people have you seen in the last hour? For many of us, or about half of a person, it's really tricky in child development. So the premise is starting well, so setting up people with a new diagnosis to really well in the beginning. Right care, right time, right place. Family and child focused, so the person with the Prader-Willi is in the centre of it all. That integration of research and clinical trials into the clinic space, and access to expertise for all are kind of the principles we're holding to. That's just to say it's lifespan. So where are we at? Well, we've built the team, we've got a steering committee, we've got a clinical advisory group. And I think we started with 4 people on the clinical advisory group. It has multiplied logarithmically with people and clinicians around the country really interested. So we've built a bigger and bigger team in Sydney. The Melbourne is now on board. We've got interest from WA. So this is going to grow quite significantly, I think. And what we're planning to do there is actually to build that expertise because, you know, most of us as doctors didn't get the encyclopedia about how to manage Prader-Willi. Okay, we learned from seeing lots of people with Prader-Willi. So it's actually walking with you guys in tandem to actually teach and educate and for the experts to actually become even more expert. So we're starting some monthly meetings for all the clinicians that are interested, and everybody's presenting complex cases, and we're chatting about it and trying to build our own expertise. So that's our first start. We've got the digital assistant trying to democratise that, and we've done a little bit of trying to train the AI to actually make sure it's not telling you rubbish and making sure it's really consistent clinical information. We're working on some standards, and the first standard we're prioritising is the standardisation of how we utilise growth hormone in infancy, trying to standardise that across the country. I think there's probably some work to do given the comments earlier about how growth hormone is then used across the ages as the next step. And then I suspect transition will be probably one of the next things in that. And these are more guides. There was a recent paper put out, which is a bit of a guide for families, but these I really want to focus on as guides for clinicians so that we get standardisation of care. We've got the care model with the nurse navigation program focusing on early diagnosis, but we are planning that regular contact with that nurse navigator can head problems off at the pass and try to avoid, turning up in hospital, because I know how much you love emergency departments. That is what we want to try and avoid. And really looking at other models of care that can build that expertise and access for people in rural, regional and remote areas. I come from the bush. I know what living in the bush is like. I'm passionate about access, and so for everybody. So I think that's going to be something we'll move forward. The other thing we're really trying to do is make sure that actually we have data that can continue to inform how we progress clinically. And so that how do we leverage the data that clinics are collecting across the country? How do we make sure people are collecting the same information so that we can start to build a really clear understanding of what individuals with Prader-Willi are coping with? We know a bit about that, but actually who's different, who might respond to different therapies. And I suspect there may be some differences. Some people might respond better to others than not. And, you know, that it will be really important, and starting to think about how we can meld those clinical trials. So that's really just going through what I've just said and summarising it, and that's where we're up to. So 2024, we've almost ticked everything off, and then next year I think we'll start to expand, particularly into the clinical trials and the research space and that data harmonisation. But we'll be evaluating the model of care so that we can try and demonstrate to government that some of these innovative things that we're trying to do is actually worth funding in a different style to what they're currently doing. Not too long.